The blizzard swallowed the mountain road as Officer Ryan Hale drove through the storm. Then, out of the white, a German shepherd appeared, blocking his path, a red bundle clutched in its jaws. Ryan stopped, stepped into the snow, and knelt beside the trembling dog. Inside the bundle he found a newborn baby girl, her skin pale, lips blue from the cold. A soaked note lay beside her. "Please, save my daughter. Her name is Ellie." He wrapped the baby in his coat and ran back to the car. The dog leapt onto the back seat, refusing to stay behind. The storm howled. Sirens echoed in the distance. Who left this baby in the snow? Why did the dog risk its life to bring her here? And what secret was waiting out there in the frozen woods? What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we dive in, leave a comment with your country. Let's see how far this journey reaches. Snow fell endlessly over Aspen Ridge, Colorado, a small town tucked between frozen ridges and whispering pines. The world outside was a blur of white and silence, broken only by the soft hum of a patrol engine weaving through the storm. Officer Ryan Hale, 36, guided his cruiser along the deserted highway. His uniform was crisp beneath a thick navy jacket, his badge faintly glinting in the dashboard light. He was tall, with broad shoulders and storm-gray eyes that reflected both vigilance and quiet sorrow. Once a city cop in Denver, Ryan had transferred to Aspen Ridge a year ago, seeking solitude after losing his wife during childbirth. The mountains, he thought, might muffle the ghosts of memory, but even here, grief followed like a shadow that never melted. The heater inside his patrol car hummed softly, fogging the edges of the windshield. Snow battered against the glass in relentless waves. Midnight, the kind of hour when nothing good ever happens. Then, in the corner of his vision, a movement. Ryan slowed. Ahead, through the swirl of white, stood a German shepherd, blocking the road. The dog's fur was heavy with snow, chest rising fast, eyes burning with an intelligence that froze Ryan's pulse. Between its jaws hung a bundle wrapped in red cloth, its edges trembling in the wind. Ryan flicked on his hazard lights and stepped into the storm. The cold hit like knives, slicing through his breath. The shepherd didn't run. It stood firm, tail stiff, trembling from exhaustion. Ryan raised a hand slowly. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice gentle but steady. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." He crouched low, boots sinking into the powder, and reached toward the bundle. The dog hesitated, then lowered its head and released the cloth. Ryan caught it, and instantly his stomach dropped. The bundle was warm in the middle. A faint sound rose from within. Fragile, broken, human. He tore the fabric open with numb fingers. Inside lay a newborn baby girl, her skin ghostly pale, lips fading toward blue. Her tiny chest quivered with each weak breath. Beside her, folded and damp, was a note written in shaky ink. "Please, save my daughter. Her name is Ellie. I can't care for her anymore." Ryan froze. For a second, the storm seemed to vanish. All that existed was this fragile life, this trembling spark of humanity left for dead in the snow. "Jesus," he whispered. He shrugged off his heavy patrol coat and wrapped the baby in it, pressing her against his chest. The warmth of his body felt pitiful against the cold biting through her tiny frame. Her breathing was uneven, slow, shallow, fading. Ryan looked at the dog. "Where did you come from?" he asked, but the question was carried away by the wind. Still, the shepherd's eyes met his, a pleading, almost human look. "All right," Ryan murmured, his breath shaking. "All right, we're getting her to help." He sprinted back toward the patrol car, boots crunching on the snow. The dog barked once, sharp and desperate, before bounding after him. Ryan opened the passenger door, slid into the driver's seat, and placed the bundled baby against his chest. The shepherd leapt onto the back seat in one fluid motion, curling tightly, its gaze fixed on the infant. Ryan started the engine, heat roaring to life. His breath fogged the glass as he pressed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've got a found infant, possibly hypothermic. Request immediate medical support. Aspen Ridge General, 10 minutes out. The response crackled faintly through static. Copy that, Unit 12. ER standing by. He slammed the car into gear. The tires spun, then caught. Snow scattered like glass behind him as the cruiser lurched forward into the night. Red and blue lights painted the storm in ghostly colors. Ryan's pulse thudded in his ears. He glanced down at the small face tucked in his coat. The baby stirred faintly, a whimper catching in her throat. He whispered, "You're safe now, Ellie. Stay with me, okay?" The German shepherd let out a soft whine from the back seat, as though echoing his plea. Ryan adjusted the heat vents, trying to push more warmth toward them. He could feel his own hands shaking. He'd seen accidents, he'd carried dying people, but this felt different, fragile, personal. Maybe it was because the baby's tiny face, pressed against his chest, reminded him of another child who never took his first breath. Claire's face flashed in his mind. His wife, her laughter, her final moments in that sterile hospital room. The doctor's words, "We did everything we could." Ryan gritted his teeth and blinked hard, forcing his focus back to the road. Snow swept across the windshield like a curtain, and every turn of the mountain felt narrower than the last. The baby whimpered again, weaker this time. He tightened his hold, whispering, "Hang on, sweetheart. We're almost there." The German shepherd shifted closer, its reflection flickering in the rearview mirror. Two dark eyes, steady and knowing. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this dog had come from somewhere beyond coincidence. It wasn't wandering, it was leading. The dashboard clock read 12:46 a.m. The road ahead stretched like an endless ribbon of ice. He could barely see the yellow lines beneath the snow, but he drove on instinct. Slow, careful, pushing through each gust of wind like a man defying fate itself. The cruiser's heater finally began to fight the cold. Ryan unzipped his jacket slightly, letting some warmth reach the baby. Ellie's tiny fingers twitched, her breathing deepening by a fraction. He exhaled shakily, a small prayer leaving his lips. "Good girl. That's it. Stay with me." The storm outside howled louder, as if the mountains themselves were warning him to turn back. But he didn't. Because for the first time in years, Ryan Hale wasn't just surviving another shift. He was protecting something that mattered. He risked a quick glance in the mirror again. The German shepherd, its fur-soaked chest rising steadily, watched the baby like a guardian. Its eyes glowed faintly in the red-blue reflection, loyal and unyielding. Ryan swallowed hard. "You brought her to me, didn't you?" he whispered. "You knew." The dog tilted its head slightly, almost in acknowledgement. He let out a breath that turned to mist. "Then you're not just some stray, you're a damn miracle." The thought came unbidden, a half-smile through the fear. Maybe he was losing it. Maybe the storm and the memories had finally gotten to him. But in that fragile warmth of the car, with a newborn fighting for life in his arms and a loyal creature guarding them from behind, something deep inside Ryan began to thaw. A flicker of purpose. A faint, forgotten light. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the world in white silence. The road twisted toward the valley where the hospital lights glimmered faintly through the storm, a beacon in the dark. Ryan pressed the accelerator gently. The cruiser surged forward. His heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the wipers, the child's faint breaths, the dog's low hum of worry. All the broken pieces of his life seemed to pulse together inside that small cocoon of steel and heat. And as the patrol car disappeared into the blizzard, Ryan whispered to no one but God in the snow, "Please, don't let me be too late." The red and blue lights of Ryan's cruiser cut through the night as he sped through the storm toward Aspen Ridge General Hospital. The baby's soft cries had faded into faint, shallow breaths, and every second felt like a gamble against the cold. Ryan gripped the steering wheel tight, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. He had driven through gunfire, wrecks, and winter wreckage before, but never with something this fragile in his arms. When the glowing hospital sign appeared through the curtain of snow, his chest loosened just slightly. "Almost there. Ellie, he whispered, voice shaking. Stay with me. He pulled into the emergency bay. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, letting out a wave of warm air and fluorescent light. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mixed with coffee and fatigue. Nurses rushed forward, their footsteps echoing on tile. Dr. Lydia Garner, a woman in her late 40s with graying brown hair tied in a bun, met him halfway. She wore a navy cardigan over green scrubs, a stethoscope around her neck, and the kind of calm that came from decades in emergency rooms. Her eyes, though tired, softened as she saw what Ryan carried. "A baby?" she breathed. "What happened?" "Found her on the mountain road," Ryan replied, his voice rough from the cold. "No ID, no sign of the mother. Severe hypothermia." Lydia's tone sharpened instantly. "We'll take it from here." Ryan hesitated before passing the bundle over. The small weight left his arms like a missing heartbeat. He followed close behind as Lydia and two nurses wheeled Ellie into a treatment room. Machines hummed to life. Monitors, oxygen lines, the steady whir of a warmer being prepped. He stood at the threshold, helpless. The child's face was so still, it terrified him. One of the nurses murmured, "Core temperature's dropping. We need a heat pad and warm IVs." Ryan's throat tightened. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned against the doorway, watching them fight for her life. Then, a faint sound reached his ears. A low whine. Soft, broken, persistent. Through the glass doors of the lobby, the German shepherd sat in the snow, chest rising heavily, fur damp and glittering under the lights. Every few seconds, it whined again, eyes fixed on the ER door like it understood exactly where the baby had gone. Ryan stepped out into the entryway. Snowflakes melted against his hair and lashes as he approached the dog. "You shouldn't still be out here," he murmured. The shepherd rose immediately, tail wagging once, cautiously. It was thinner than he'd realized, ribs faintly visible under the thick coat. Up close, Ryan could see faint marks around its neck, the impression of an old collar or restraint. Someone had tied this animal once, tight and long enough to scar. "You've been through something too, huh?" he said quietly. The dog tilted its head, studying him. Ryan opened the back of the cruiser, grabbed a thermal, blanket from his kit, and draped it over the shepherd's back. "You earned this more than I did." He rummaged through a lunchbox on the front seat, finding leftover sandwich meat. The dog devoured it gently, its movements careful, almost polite. Inside, the storm thudded against the hospital windows. Ryan crouched beside the animal, rubbing its fur dry. "You brought her to me," he said, his voice low. "You didn't just find her, you saved her." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his voice as though it recognized its new name forming in his thoughts. Ryan smiled faintly. "Valor?" he whispered. "That's what you are. Brave enough to fight a storm for someone who couldn't fight back." He looked up through the glass doors toward the hallway where Ellie lay fighting for warmth. The memory of his wife's last moments hit him like the cold air again, her trembling hand clutching his, her whisper fading into the hum of hospital machines. "You'll be a good father, Rye." The words hurt more now. "Officer Hale?" Ryan turned. Standing at the ER desk was Sheriff Tom Jacobs, a man in his early 50s, stocky with a silver mustache and a brown leather jacket worn from decades of field work. His presence filled the space, calm, grounded, but edged with authority. "I heard your call over dispatch," Jacobs said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "They said you found an infant on Highway 9? Ryan nodded. "Left out there in the snow, wrapped in a red cloth, no one else around." Jacobs frowned deeply. "Any signs of a vehicle or footprints?" "Nothing but this dog," Ryan replied. "He brought her to me." The sheriff followed Ryan's gaze to Valor, who sat quietly by the doorway, eyes alert but calm. "Smart animal," Jacobs muttered. Then his tone turned serious. "We'll need to figure out where she came from. Could be the mother's still out there, maybe injured. Or hiding," Ryan said softly. Jacobs nodded. "Either way, we'll send a search team at first light. You did good, Hale." Ryan didn't respond right away. He just looked back toward the emergency room window. watching through the glass as the nurses wrapped Ellie in warm blankets and placed her beneath a heating lamp. The faint rise and fall of her chest steadied slightly. For the first time that night, Ryan let himself exhale. A nurse stepped out, removing her gloves. She was young, maybe late 20s, with blonde hair tucked under a surgical cap. Her name tag read Nurse Claire Morton. "She's stabilizing," she said, smiling softly. "Still weak, but she's responding to the heat therapy. You got her here just in time." Ryan's voice was quiet. "She's going to make it?" Claire nodded. "We think so. Babies are stronger than they look." Her eyes flicked to Valor. "And I guess we have him to thank, too." Valor gave a small wag of his tail, then sat upright like a soldier on duty. Ryan found himself smiling for the first time that night. "He's Valor," he said. "That's his name now." Claire smiled faintly, jotting something on her clipboard before disappearing back into the ER. Sheriff Jacobs clapped Ryan on the shoulder. "You look dead on your feet. Get some coffee, write your report, then head home. I'll handle the investigation from here." Ryan nodded, but didn't move. His gaze lingered on the glass window separating him from the baby. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors echoed faintly through the corridor, a sound he'd once associated with death, now suddenly filled with fragile hope. Valor nudged his knee, letting out a soft chuff as if reminding him not to drift too far into old memories. Ryan looked down, smiling tiredly. "Yeah," he murmured. "We'll stay till morning." The storm outside raged on, blanketing the town in layers of silence and light. Inside, the sterile warmth of the hospital glowed like a small miracle against the dark. Ryan sank onto a chair near the waiting room window, Valor lying at his feet. He watched the snow fall beyond the glass, each flake disappearing into the night. He didn't know who had left Ellie out there. He didn't know what kind of pain drove a mother to such desperation. But for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside, a pulse that wasn't grief, but purpose. He reached down, resting his hand on Valor's head. "We did good, partner," he whispered. "Let's see where this takes us." Valor's tail thumped softly against the floor, a single beat in the quiet rhythm of hope that had finally returned to Officer Ryan Hale's world. Morning came late to Aspen Ridge, the sun struggling to pierce the heavy veil of storm clouds that hung low over the town. The snowfall had eased but left behind a thick silence, the kind that made every sound seem sharper, each breath, each crunch of boots against ice. Inside the small hospital, the hum of machines continued steadily in Ellie's room. She was stronger now, her color returning little by little, her tiny fingers curling weakly around the edge of her blanket. Officer Ryan Hale sat slumped in a plastic chair near the window, a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hands. His eyes were bloodshot, his uniform still dusted with dried snow. He hadn't gone home, not even for a shower. The storm outside had faded into a gray drizzle, but inside him the storm was far from over. Every few minutes he would glance at the door, half expecting the nurse to step out with bad news. Valor lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, ears twitching whenever the door creaked. The dog hadn't left the hospital lobby all night, barely touching the food Ryan had offered. He seemed restless, agitated, as if something out there was calling him. Dr. Lydia Garner entered quietly, her expression soft. "She's responding well," she said, taking a seat beside Ryan. "The hypothermia's under control. She'll need monitoring, but she's going to make it." Ryan exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Doc. Really." Lydia gave him a small smile. "She's a lucky girl. Most wouldn't have survived a night like that." Her eyes flicked toward Valor. "And I suppose we have him to thank, too." Valor lifted his head at the sound of her voice, tail thumping weakly once before going still again. Ryan reached down, scratching behind his ears. "Yeah," he murmured. "He's the real hero." But Valor wasn't relaxed. His ears perked suddenly, nose twitching toward the door. He let out a low whine, then stood, pacing in a tight circle before nudging Ryan's knee insistently. Ryan frowned. "What is it, boy?" The dog barked once, sharply, and trotted toward the glass doors leading outside. He looked back over his shoulder, eyes gleaming with intent. Lydia raised an eyebrow. He wants you to follow." Ryan hesitated. "He did this last night too, right before he found her." The doctor's smile faded. "Then maybe he's trying to tell you something again." Ryan grabbed his coat, pulling it tight around him. "Keep an eye on Ellie. I'll be back soon." Outside, the cold air bit into his lungs. The snow had hardened overnight into a crust that crunched under his boots. Valor bounded ahead, tail stiff, nose to the ground. Ryan followed, his instincts prickling. The trail led past the hospital's back parking lot and into the dense pines of North Ridge Forest, where the air turned quiet and damp. The German Shepherd moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to make sure Ryan was keeping up. His breath came out in white clouds as they climbed deeper into the woods, the path narrowing between snow-covered trees. Then Ryan saw it, a faint column of smoke rising from beyond the ridge. It drifted lazily through the cold air, barely visible against the white sky. "Someone's out here," he muttered, quickening his pace. The cabin appeared minutes later, half buried in snow, its wooden walls warped with age. A rusty mailbox leaned crookedly at the edge of a path that hadn't been shoveled in weeks. The smoke came from a narrow metal pipe jutting out from the roof, proof that whoever lived here hadn't frozen to death. Valor stopped near the porch, ears flattened, tail wagging uncertainly. He let out a low bark, almost cautious. Ryan's hand hovered near his holster. Though his instincts told him this wasn't a criminal encounter, it felt heavier, more human. He stepped carefully onto the porch, his boots thudding softly against the planks. He knocked once. "Hello? This is Officer Ryan Hale with Aspen Ridge Police. Is anyone home?" No answer. He tried again, louder this time. "We're not here to hurt you. Please open the door." A faint sound came from inside, a shuffle, a creak, then silence. Valor whined softly and pressed his nose against the door. Ryan sighed and tried the handle. It gave with a quiet click. The smell of wood smoke and something sour hit him as he stepped inside. The cabin was dimly lit by a dying fire. Blankets were strewn across the floor, a few empty cans scattered near a battered armchair. And there, in the corner, sat a young woman, Sarah Bennett, though he didn't know her name yet. She couldn't have been more than 28. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands over a pale, tear-streaked face. She wore a faded flannel shirt and a gray blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were hollow, sunken from lack of sleep, and her hands trembled violently. Dried blood stained her left wrist. When she saw the uniform, her whole body stiffened. "No, no, please," she stammered, voice hoarse. I didn't mean to—" Ryan held up a hand. "It's okay. I'm not here to arrest you." She shook her head, backing further into the corner. "You're lying. You'll take me away. You'll take her away." Ryan's heart stopped. "Her?" Before he could speak, Valor stepped forward quietly. The dog moved slowly, cautiously, tail low, eyes fixed on Sarah. When he reached her, he pressed his head gently against her knee and gave a soft whine. Sarah froze, then let out a broken sob. Her fingers moved hesitantly to the dog's head, stroking his fur as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "You came back," she whispered. "You really came back." Ryan watched in silence, piecing the truth together. The way she spoke, the way Valor's body language softened. "This is your dog," he said quietly. "You sent him out there, didn't you?" Sarah nodded weakly, voice cracking. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't—" She swallowed hard. "I couldn't watch her die. I thought someone would find her faster than they'd find me." Ryan crouched a few feet away, lowering his voice. "Your baby's alive. She's at the hospital. She's safe." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "She's alive?" "Yes," Ryan said. "You saved her." She covered her mouth, trembling. For a moment, the room filled only with the sound of her sobs and the faint crackle of the dying fire. Ryan noticed the bruises along her neck, faint but recent. The marks on her wrist told the rest of the story. He spoke gently. "Sarah, you've been hurt. Did someone do this to you?" Her gaze fell to the floor. "My husband," she whispered. He used to hit me. I ran 2 weeks ago when he said he'd rather see me dead than raising his child." She looked up slowly, eyes hollow. "I didn't have anywhere to go. The cabin belonged to my grandmother. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe he'd stop looking." Ryan's jaw tightened. "He's not going to hurt you again. I promise you that." Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You don't have to promise me anything. I already gave up." Valor nudged her hand again, refusing to let her retreat into despair. Ryan stood, glancing toward the window. "You need medical attention. You're freezing, and you've lost blood. Let me take you back to town. Your daughter's waiting." Sarah's lips trembled. I can't face her. I left her there." "Then let this be how you make it right," Ryan said softly. "She needs you alive, not hiding in the dark." The silence stretched for a long moment before Sarah finally nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Ryan helped her stand. She swayed, weak from exhaustion. Valor pressed against her side for support, guiding her gently toward the door. As they stepped out into the fading light, the storm clouds began to break. Pale sunbeams filtered through the trees, scattering over the snow like a quiet blessing. Ryan looked back at the cabin one last time, the place where despair had nearly ended a family's story. Now, it would be where their healing began. He glanced down at Valor. "Good work, partner," he murmured. The dog's ears twitched, and his eyes gleamed as if he understood that the trail he had followed through the storm had finally led them to the truth. The wind outside the cruiser had calmed to a whisper as Officer Ryan Hale drove carefully through the icy mountain road, heading back toward Aspen Ridge. The forest behind them was fading into pale morning light, and the sky glowed faintly pink above the frozen treetops. Inside the car, the heater hummed softly, battling the cold that clung to their clothes. Sarah Bennett sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in a hospital blanket that Ryan had kept in the trunk. Her hands trembled slightly, though whether from cold or nerves, he couldn't tell. Valor lay quietly across the back seat, his head resting between them, as if to bridge the silent distance. Sarah's face was pale beneath the mess of dark hair that framed her eyes. There were faint cuts on her knuckles, old bruises hidden under the sleeves of her flannel. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks, maybe months. Ryan glanced at her briefly. "You warm enough?" he asked. She nodded, eyes fixed on the window. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The drive to town stretched in silence for several miles before Sarah spoke again. "I didn't think anyone would find her," she said, voice breaking on the last word. I thought it would end fast." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. "When I let Valor go, he looked back at me. I almost called him back, but I knew if I did I'd never be able to let her go." Ryan said nothing at first. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You did what you thought would save her," he said gently. "That dog must have walked miles through that storm." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't deserve for him to come back." They reached the hospital as the last traces of snow began to fall like soft feathers over the parking lot. Nurse Claire was waiting at the entrance, her blonde hair tied back, her expression filled with cautious hope. "She's awake," she said, as Ryan opened the door for Sarah. "Still weak, but her temperature's stable." Sarah froze on the threshold, her breath quick and shallow. "I can't," she whispered. "She won't know me." Ryan looked at her firmly. "She doesn't have to know you yet. Just be there." Inside the ward, the world was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the steady hum of machines. Sarah stopped just short of the bassinet. Ellie was sleeping, tiny chest rising and falling beneath a pink blanket. For a long moment, Sarah didn't move. Then her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. Ryan knelt beside her, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. "She's alive because of you," he said softly. "Because you had the strength to let her go when you thought you couldn't keep her safe." Sarah shook her head. "No, I left her to die." Ryan's voice grew quiet, almost a whisper. "You left her to live." She looked up at him then, really looked, and for The first time, saw the grief behind his steady eyes. "You've lost someone too," she said, not as a question but a recognition. He nodded once. "My wife. 2 years ago. Complications after childbirth." He swallowed hard. "Our son didn't make it either." The silence that followed was heavy but not empty. It was the kind of silence that only two people who had seen too much pain could share without words. Dr. Lydia entered softly, clipboard in hand. "Sarah Bennett?" she asked gently. "You need to be checked for frostbite and dehydration. I'd also like to schedule a counseling session once you're rested." Lydia's tone was kind, but professional, her years in medicine giving her the calm that came only from surviving other people's storms. Sarah nodded weakly. "Whatever you need." Ryan stood. "I'll make sure she gets whatever care she needs. She's not a suspect, Lydia. She's a victim." The doctor gave him a small, knowing smile. "I already noted it in her chart, Officer Hale." After Lydia left, Ryan turned back to Sarah. "When you're ready, we'll need to talk about what happened, about your husband." Sarah's eyes flicked down. "Mark," she said quietly. "His name's Mark Benson. He wasn't always like this. He used to be kind." Her lips trembled as she spoke. "Then after Ellie was born, he said I'd ruined his life, that he couldn't stand to look at her because she looked like me. He started drinking, breaking things. He'd scream for hours, then apologize, then do it again." Ryan listened in silence, fists clenched at his sides. "One night, he told me he'd rather see both of us dead than have me leave him. I grabbed Ellie and ran. We slept in a rest stop bathroom the first night. Then Valor found us." Her voice softened. "He wasn't mine at first, just a stray that wouldn't leave us. I think he knew." She paused, staring at the sleeping baby. "When the storm came, I knew we wouldn't survive. My hands were frozen. Ellie had stopped crying. I thought she was already gone." She covered her face, trembling. "So, I wrote the note and told Valor to find someone. I didn't expect him to actually do it." Ryan crouched in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "You're not alone anymore, Sarah." She gave a broken laugh. "You sound like you believe that." "I have to," he said simply. "It's the only way I know how to keep breathing." Valor, lying beside the bed, raised his head and looked at Sarah. He hadn't moved from her side since they'd entered, his chin resting near her foot, a silent guardian. She reached down, stroking his ear gently. "He's the reason I'm still here," she whispered. Ryan smiled faintly. "That makes 2 of us." For the rest of the morning, Sarah underwent tests while Ryan filled out reports. Sheriff Jacobs stopped by briefly, his hat tucked under his arm, and asked a few questions about her husband's whereabouts. Ryan told him what he'd learned. Jacobs frowned. "We'll start a search for the man, but if he's smart, he's already far from here." Ryan's tone was steady. "If he's looking for her, he'll come back." Jacobs clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll be ready." When Ryan returned to the hospital room, Sarah was sitting by Ellie's bedside, holding one tiny hand between her fingers. The sunlight filtered through the frosted window, catching in her hair. She looked different somehow, fragile still, but no longer hollow. Valor sat beside her, eyes half closed, the picture of calm. Ryan lingered by the doorway, not wanting to break the stillness. For a moment he saw something in Sarah that mirrored the part of him he'd buried. The will to start over, even after the world had taken everything. Finally, he stepped closer. "I've arranged a temporary shelter for you," he said quietly, "just until you're stronger. After that, we'll figure out the rest." Sarah looked up, her eyes red but steady. "Why are you helping me?" Ryan hesitated before answering. "Because someone should have helped me when I needed it." She didn't speak again, but the faintest hint of gratitude flickered across her face. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Ryan stood by the window, watching the snow melt into rivulets along the glass. Valor rested at his feet, eyes fixed on the 2 figures by the hospital bed, a mother and her child, slowly rediscovering the fragile thread that tied them to life. And, for the first time in years, Ryan felt the faint, unfamiliar warmth of something he thought he'd lost forever, peace. Morning broke over Aspen Ridge with a muted golden light that spilled through the frosted hospital windows. Snow still blanketed the streets, but the storm had finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and eerily still. Inside the pediatric ward, machines hummed quietly, monitors blinking soft green rhythms that felt almost like the beating of tiny hearts. Sarah Bennett sat motionless beside the glass partition that separated her from the nursery. Her shoulders were wrapped in a pale hospital shawl, and her dark hair, freshly washed but still damp, fell loosely against her back. The faint scent of antiseptic mixed with the delicate warmth of baby powder in the air. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together, the faint red scars along her wrists visible in the morning light. Inside the nursery, Ellie lay nestled in a bassinet lined with pink blankets. Her cheeks had gained color overnight, her breathing steady and soft. Every rise and fall of her chest seemed like a miracle to Sarah, a fragile rhythm that both comforted and punished her. "I didn't think I'd ever see her again," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I prayed for her to be safe, but not for me to be forgiven." Behind her, Ryan stood quietly, still in his uniform from the night before, though his jacket now hung open and his eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. He carried a thermos of coffee in one hand and an awkward gentleness in the other. "Forgiveness doesn't come from what you've done," he said softly. "It comes from what you choose to do now." Sarah turned, her eyes swollen and red. "You talk like someone who's already been forgiven." Ryan's lips curved into a small, tired smile. "No, I talk like someone still trying." For a while, neither spoke. The snow outside glittered on the windowsill like scattered glass, and the hospital clock ticked softly in the background. Valor lay at Sarah's feet, head resting on his paws, his golden-brown fur freshly brushed by one of the nurses who'd fallen in love with him overnight. Every so often the German shepherd lifted his eyes toward Sarah as if reading her thoughts. Finally, Sarah stood. Her knees trembled, but Ryan steadied her with a hand at her elbow. Together, they stepped into the nursery. The nurse on duty, Nurse Lillian Moore, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and soft gray hair tucked beneath her cap, smiled warmly at them. "She's been strong all morning," she said quietly. "Temperature's normal, vitals steady. She's a fighter." Sarah's lips quivered. She always was. Lillian guided her gently toward the bassinet. "Go ahead," she said, stepping aside. Sarah sank to her knees beside Ellie's crib, one trembling hand hovering over the baby's tiny fingers. For a long moment, she couldn't bring herself to touch her. Then, with a choked sob, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against the glass and whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her tears fell soundlessly. Valor rose and padded to her side, resting his chin on her knee. His weight was solid, grounding, his quiet presence more healing than words. Sarah's trembling hand moved from the glass to Valor's head, and she whispered, "You saved her. You saved both of us." Ryan stood nearby, arms crossed loosely, watching in silence. The way Sarah's hands shook reminded him of his own the night he lost Claire. Back then, he had also stood beside a crib, but one that never moved, never cried. Watching Sarah and Ellie now felt like looking through a window into a life he could have had but never would. Dr. Lydia entered softly, her white coat catching the sunlight as she approached. "Sarah," she began gently, "Ellie's recovery is remarkable, but you need rest too. We've scheduled an evaluation at the Aspen Ridge Mental Health Center. It's standard for trauma and postpartum depression." Sarah turned, eyes wide with alarm. "You think I'm crazy?" "No," Lydia said kindly. "I think you've survived something no one should have to survive. That deserves help, not judgment." Ryan nodded in agreement. "She's right. You don't have to go through this alone anymore." Sarah's gaze dropped to the floor. "I don't have a home anymore," she said quietly. That cabin was the only place he wouldn't look. "I can help with that," Ryan said. "There's a small rental near the station. It's warm, quiet, and close enough for me to check in, just until you're steady again." Lydia glanced at him with approval. "That could work, as long as she's under supervision." Just then, the door swung open. and Sheriff Tom Jacobs entered. His heavy coat carried the chill of the outside air, and his broad hands were wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning," he said gruffly, though his eyes softened when he saw Sarah by the bassinet. "Good to see the little one doing better." Ryan straightened. "We're planning to relocate Sarah temporarily, somewhere safe until we know her husband's out of the picture." Jacobs nodded, scratching the back of his neck. "We've got men checking surrounding towns. No sign of Mark Benson so far, but I'm not taking chances." He studied Sarah for a moment. "You're under no arrest, ma'am. Officer Hale here will serve as your temporary guardian under protective supervision. It's the least we can do." Sarah blinked, clearly surprised. "You'd do that? For me?" Jacobs shrugged. "You're a mother who tried to save her child. That counts for something in my book?" He gave a brief nod toward Ryan. "Hale's one of the good ones. He won't let anything happen to you." After Jacobs left, Ryan noticed the faint relief on Sarah's face. "I can't promise this will be easy," he said, "but I can promise you'll have a roof, food, and safety." Sarah reached for Ellie again, brushing her fingertip lightly over the baby's tiny hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Ryan said quietly. "Just keep breathing." Valor huffed softly, as if agreeing. Sarah smiled faintly through her tears. "He's not leaving my side, is he?" Ryan shook his head. "Not a chance. I think you've both been claimed." The rest of the morning passed in a kind of gentle blur. Lydia finalized Sarah's papers for temporary psychological care. Nurse Lillian packed a small bag with baby supplies, formula, blankets, and diapers. Ryan filled out the necessary forms at the front desk, his signature firm and precise. By the time everything was arranged, the afternoon sun had begun to glow through the hospital windows, filling the corridor with golden light. Ryan escorted Sarah back into Ellie's room for one last moment before discharge. The nurse placed Ellie carefully in Sarah's arms. The baby stirred, opening her eyes for the first time since the rescue. They were a deep, clear blue, reflecting the light like a morning sky after a storm. Sarah gasped softly, her entire body trembling. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's me, Mommy." Ryan looked away, blinking hard. The sight hit something deep inside him, a place that still ached, still mourned what could have been. He busied himself with adjusting Valor's collar, though his voice came out rough when he spoke. "You ready to go?" Sarah nodded through tears. "Yes, I think I finally am." Together, they walked down the quiet hospital hallway, Sarah holding Ellie close, Valor trotting at her side, and Ryan following a few steps behind. The glass doors slid open, letting in the crisp air of early afternoon. The snow outside sparkled under sunlight, a landscape no longer hostile but full of quiet promise. As they stepped into the light, Ryan glanced at the two fragile souls beside him and felt, for the first time in a long while, that maybe life had decided to give him one more chance to make something right. The drive out of town followed a narrow, winding road that hugged the frozen lake. The afternoon light shimmered on the ice like scattered silver. Snow still clung to the branches of the pines, but the wind had softened to a calm hush. Ryan's old patrol SUV hummed steadily as it made its way toward the far side of Aspen Ridge, where houses thinned and only the lake and the woods remained. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, bundled in a borrowed winter coat that looked a size too big on her slender frame. Ellie slept quietly in her arms, her tiny breaths fogging the soft fleece blanket. In the back seat, Valor sat alert and content, occasionally resting his head on the headrest between them as though ensuring his new pack was still safe. Ryan broke the silence first. "We're almost there. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm, and it's safe." Sarah looked out the window. The trees thinned until the open water of the frozen lake appeared. Silver Pine Lake, calm and vast, its edges framed by birch trees. Ahead stood a small, weathered cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. The wood siding had faded from years of snow and wind, but the porch looked recently cleared. "You live here alone?" she asked quietly. Ryan nodded. Yeah, been here about a year. After Denver, I needed quiet. His tone made clear there was more behind those words, but Sarah didn't ask. When they stepped out, the snow crunched softly beneath their boots. Ryan hurried ahead, unlocking the front door and flicking on the lights. The warm glow spilled out onto the porch. Inside, the space was small but tidy. A single living room with a wood stove, a worn leather couch, a small kitchen tucked behind an archway. Sarah stepped in hesitantly, clutching Ellie to her chest. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Ryan chuckled softly. "You're being generous, but it keeps the cold out." He took Ellie from her gently, laying her in a small woven bassinet he'd borrowed from the hospital. Valor followed closely, sniffing the corners of the cabin before settling beside the baby's cradle, curling protectively like a sentinel. His fur brushed the wooden floor, tail flicking lazily. Ryan set down his coat and began lighting the stove. The scent of burning pine filled the air, chasing away the chill that had followed them. "You can use the guest room," he said, nodding toward the small door at the end of the hallway. "Fresh sheets, extra blankets in the closet, bathrooms across from it." Sarah glanced around the room, eyes softening. "You didn't have to do all this." Ryan poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one to her. "Yeah, I did." He looked around the room, then back at her. "People forget what safe feels like. Sometimes you have to relearn it." They sat at the table near the window overlooking the lake. The steam from the tea fogged the glass as they watched dusk settle over the water. Sarah took a sip and exhaled shakily. "I haven't sat down for tea since before everything fell apart." "Then it's long overdue," Ryan said gently. The hours passed quietly. Ryan busied himself in the kitchen pulling together a simple meal: soup, fresh bread, and some fruit from the cooler. Sarah tried to help, but he waved her off. "You rest. You've done enough surviving for one lifetime." When he brought the food to the table, Valor lifted his head hopefully. Ryan chuckled. "You too, buddy. You've earned dinner." He tossed the dog a small piece of bread, which Valor caught mid-air before curling back near Ellie's bassinet. Sarah watched the scene, her expression caught between gratitude and disbelief. "It feels strange," she said softly, "to have quiet like this, to not be afraid of every sound." Ryan's gaze drifted toward the window, where snow fell in gentle flakes across the lake. "You'll get used to it. Peace has a way of feeling wrong at first." Later that night, when Ellie stirred, Sarah rose instinctively, cradling her daughter against her chest. Valor stood too, patting over and sitting close as if keeping watch. Ryan appeared from the hallway, half awake, his hair tousled, holding a folded blanket. "Here," he said quietly, draping it over Sarah's shoulders. She smiled faintly. "You don't sleep much, do you?" He shrugged. "Old habits. The quiet's too loud sometimes." Sarah looked down at Ellie's small face and whispered, "It's beautiful here. You saved us." Ryan shook his head. "No, Valor did. I just drove the car." Valor's ears perked up at his name, tail giving a slow, steady wag. Sarah laughed softly for the first time in months, a small sound, fragile but real. "He's our guardian angel," she said. "He's yours now," Ryan replied. "Seems like he already made up his mind." By morning, the cabin felt alive. Sunlight spilled through the frosted windows, glinting off the lake. Ryan stood by the stove making coffee while Sarah fed Ellie by the window, humming softly to her. Valor, never far, lay under the crib with one paw draped protectively across the floor. Ryan handed Sarah a plate of eggs and toast. "Breakfast of champions," he said with a grin. She accepted it carefully. "I can help, you know. I'm not completely useless." He smiled. "Didn't say you were, but you're under my roof, so breakfast is my job." For a moment it almost felt like a family, the kind of normal that neither of them had dared to imagine. That afternoon, Ryan showed her the small wooden dock out back. The lake stretched endlessly before them, framed by trees heavy with snow. "When it thaws, this place looks different," he said. "You can fish from here, or just sit and forget the world for a while." Sarah breathed in deeply. I'd like that. Then you'll have to stick around long enough to see it. She smiled quietly. You're not getting rid of us that easily. As evening returned, Ryan brought out an old box of baby toys and blankets he'd kept in storage, a box he'd never been able to open since Claire's passing. His hands trembled slightly as he set it down beside Sarah. What's this? She asked softly. Stuff I thought I'd never use again. He forced a small smile. Guess I was wrong. Sarah's eyes glistened, but she didn't press. She reached into the box and pulled out a small rattle shaped like a star. Ellie's fingers caught it instantly, and a faint giggle escaped her lips. The sound drew a quiet laugh from Ryan, raw and unguarded. For a moment, grief and warmth collided in the same heartbeat. Later that night, as snow fell again in soft flakes outside, Sarah sat on the couch while Ryan stoked the fire. The cabin glowed in amber light, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Ellie slept soundly. Valor curled up beside her cradle, tail flicking rhythmically. Sarah looked at Ryan across the flickering light. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Ryan didn't look up from the fire. You don't owe me thanks, Sarah. You don't owe me anything. If anyone saved you, it was Valor, and maybe yourself. She smiled faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe. But thank you anyway. Ryan met her eyes then, soft, steady, with that hint of sorrow that never quite left him. Get some rest, he said gently. You're safe here. As she drifted toward sleep, Valor shifted closer to the bassinet, resting his head against it, eyes half closed but alert. Ryan watched the three of them, the sleeping child, the exhausted mother, the faithful dog, and felt something unfamiliar press against his chest. Hope. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the moonlight, and the little cabin stood like a beacon of quiet redemption amid the snow. The quiet of the lake had a way of deceiving people. It whispered peace into your ear, promised safety in its still reflection, but beneath the surface, shadows could still stir. For the first time in weeks, Ryan Hale's cabin had known laughter. Sarah was learning to cook again, Ellie was gaining weight and cooing at every flicker of light, and Valor had appointed himself the household guardian, never straying far from the baby's crib. But that peace began to shift on a Thursday night, when the wind howled again across Silver Pine Lake, carrying a chill that Ryan hadn't felt since the storm that first brought them all together. He was sitting by the stove, reviewing reports from the sheriff's office, when Valor suddenly lifted his head. The German shepherd's ears pricked, body tense, eyes fixed toward the front door. A low growl rumbled in his throat, a sound that sent an instinctive warning through Ryan's chest. "What is it, boy?" Ryan muttered, rising to his feet. The dog stood, muscles coiled, eyes unblinking. Outside, the wind whipped harder, rattling the window panes. But this wasn't the sound of weather. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over frozen snow. Ryan moved to the door, one hand resting on the holster at his belt. "Sarah," he said quietly, "stay in the back room with Ellie. Don't come out until I say so." Sarah froze halfway through folding laundry. The fear that flickered across her face was sharp and immediate. "Is it him?" she whispered. "I don't know," Ryan said, "but I'll find out." Valor was already at the door, growling softly. Ryan opened it a crack, scanning the dark. The floodlight over the porch flickered once, then steadied. At first, he saw nothing but snow and trees. Then a figure moved near the edge of the clearing, tall, heavy-built, wearing a dark coat. The man's gait was stiff, deliberate. "Evening," Ryan called out, his voice steady. "Can I help you?" The figure stepped closer, into the light. He was in his early 30s, with close-cropped brown hair, a square jaw, and eyes that burned with the kind of anger only grief or guilt could forge. His face was rough, unshaven, and a deep scar cut across his left cheek. Mark Benson, Sarah's husband. "Yeah," he said slowly, his voice hoarse. "You can help me. You can tell me where my wife is." Ryan's jaw tightened. You mean the woman you beat until she had to run for her life? She's not yours to find anymore, Benson. Turn around and head back down that road before I put you in cuffs. Mark's lips twisted into a cold smile. You think you can hide her from me? I've been following her scent for weeks. Someone told me she was seen in Aspen Ridge. You don't know what she's done. Valor let out a warning bark, sharp and loud enough to echo across the lake. Mark's eyes darted toward the sound. That your mutt? He sneered. Figures. She always liked strays. Ryan stepped forward, blocking the doorway. Leave now, Benson. I'm not going to say it again. Mark's expression darkened. You don't understand. She ruined everything. Took my child, took my life. He reached inside his coat. Ryan's instincts screamed. Don't you move, he barked, drawing his weapon. But Valor moved faster. The dog lunged through the open door, knocking Mark off balance just as something metallic glinted in his hand. A small revolver. The gun went off, the shot echoing through the night, but the bullet buried itself harmlessly in the snow. Valor! Ryan shouted. The German shepherd pinned Mark to the ground, snarling, teeth bared inches from the man's throat. Mark tried to swing, but Valor snapped at his arm, forcing him still. Ryan rushed forward, kicking the revolver aside and grabbing the man's wrist. With a practiced motion, he twisted and cuffed him. You're done, Ryan said, voice low and cold. Mark spat into the snow. She'll always be mine. Ryan hauled him upright. Not anymore. Inside the cabin, Sarah clutched Ellie close, tears streaming silently down her face as she heard the muffled shouting outside. The baby whimpered in her arms. Valor's bark echoed once more, followed by the crunch of boots and Ryan's steady voice calling, It's over. When he stepped back inside, snow on his shoulders, his eyes softened as he looked at them. He's in custody, he said gently. You're safe now. Sarah's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor. Valor approached, pressing his head into her lap as if to steady her trembling hands. He found us, she whispered. Not anymore, Ryan replied. He won't again. Minutes later, red and blue lights cut through the trees as Sheriff Jacobs arrived with 2 deputies. The older man's breath fogged in the cold as he approached. Heard the call on the radio, Jacobs said, nodding toward the handcuffed Mark in the back of the cruiser. Good work, Hale. Could have gone a lot worse. Ryan crossed his arms, still watching as the deputies loaded the prisoner. He came here with a weapon, tried to break in. Jacobs shook his head. We'll keep him under watch. Assault with a firearm, trespassing, attempted kidnapping. You've got more than enough to bury him. Sarah appeared in the doorway, clutching Ellie. Jacob's eyes softened when he saw her. Ma'am, he said kindly, tipping his hat, you don't need to worry anymore. He'll be behind bars for a long time. Thank you, she whispered. As the cars disappeared down the snowy road, the night returned to stillness. Ryan exhaled slowly, holstering his gun. The adrenaline drained from his body, leaving behind only the echo of fear. He turned to Valor, who was sitting proudly beside the porch steps, tail wagging slightly. The dog's fur was dusted with snow, his breath coming in heavy puffs, but his eyes gleamed with calm satisfaction. Ryan crouched beside him, resting a hand on his neck. You did good, boy. Real good. Sarah stepped closer, tears still fresh. He saved us again, she said softly. He knew before any of us did. Ryan nodded. He's got instincts sharper than most men I've worked with. He paused, then smiled faintly. Think it's time we made it official. The next morning, at the sheriff's office, the paperwork was waiting on Ryan's desk. A simple form with heavy meaning. K-9, Honorary Unit Induction. Sheriff Jacobs stood nearby, pen in hand. You sure about this? He asked, a hint of a smile under his mustache. Never been surer, Ryan said. He's earned it. Jacobs nodded. Then it's done. Valor Hale, Honorary K-9 of Aspen Ridge County. He signed the line with a flourish. Welcome to the force, hero. Back at the cabin, Ryan knelt beside Valor, clipping a new metal tag onto his collar. It gleamed in the firelight. Aspen Ridge Police. Honorary K-9 Unit. Sarah stood nearby, holding Ellie. "He looks proud," she said softly. Ryan chuckled. "He should be. He's part of this family now." Valor barked once, short and clear, as if understanding every word. Then he trotted to Ellie's crib, curling beside it, his tail thumping against the wood. Sarah looked out the window toward the snowy trees where fear had once hidden. For the first time in years, she saw only peace. "Maybe," she said quietly, "we can finally start over." Ryan looked at her, then at the fire that flickered warm against the walls. "Yeah," he said, "we already have." Outside, the wind softened over the frozen lake, carrying away the last ghosts of the past. Spring arrived in Aspen Ridge like a hesitant visitor, testing the ground before stepping fully in. The snow that had once buried the pines was now melting into silver streams that trickled down toward Silver Pine Lake. The ice began to crack, revealing dark reflections of sky and trees. For the first time in months, the air no longer carried the bite of survival, but the breath of renewal. Ryan Hale stood by the porch railing of his cabin, mug of coffee in hand. His navy flannel shirt was rolled at the sleeves, and his storm-gray eyes tracked the ripples forming where the ice met open water. Inside, Sarah Bennett's soft laughter carried through the half-open window, a sound that had once been unthinkable. Sarah was in the living room, wearing a simple cream sweater and jeans, her hair tied back loosely. She leaned over Ellie, now almost 6 months old, who kicked and gurgled on a blanket spread near the fireplace. Valor lay stretched out beside them, head resting on his paws, tail flicking lazily every time the baby's laughter burst into the air. When Ryan stepped inside, Sarah looked up and smiled. A small, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "She's discovered her feet," she said, chuckling as Ellie grabbed at her toes, "and apparently thinks they're the funniest thing in the world." Ryan grinned. "Takes after her mom, then." Sarah blushed faintly, pretending not to hear. "Did you get the forms printed?" He handed her a folder. "All ready. I'll take them to the courthouse tomorrow. Once the paperwork's through, Mark will be legally out of your life." Her hands lingered on the papers for a moment, the weight of years pressing into her palms. "I don't know how to thank you for all this," she murmured. "You don't have to," Ryan said, his tone gentle but firm. "You're not doing this for me. You're doing it for you and for her." Sarah looked at Ellie, her expression softening. "For her," she whispered. Later that morning, Ryan offered to take them for a walk. The weather was mild enough now that the roads were clear, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. He pushed the baby stroller down the quiet lane that curved around the lake, while Sarah walked beside him, hands tucked into her coat pockets. Valor trotted ahead, nose to the wind, occasionally glancing back to make sure his little pack was keeping pace. The world looked different now, lighter, kinder. The snowbanks had retreated to the forest's edge, leaving behind muddy grass and small yellow flowers fighting to bloom. The air buzzed faintly with birds returning from the south. Sarah tilted her head toward the horizon. "I used to love spring," she said softly. "It always felt like a clean slate. Then everything that happened, it just turned into another season to survive." Ryan slowed his pace. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now it feels like breathing again." They stopped by the lake's edge, where the ice had melted into shimmering water. Sarah crouched to pick up a small pebble and tossed it gently, watching it skip once before sinking. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "Here, in Aspen Ridge. I don't know how long you'll let us, but this—" She gestured toward the cabin behind them, the lake, the sky. "It's the first place that's ever felt safe." Ryan looked at her, a warmth flickering behind his eyes. "Then stay. You don't need permission for that." Ellie cooed loudly, breaking the silence, and Valor barked once as if in agreement. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. "Guess it's unanimous." That afternoon, after Ellie's nap, Ryan brought out an old digital camera. "You ever use one of these?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "I used to take pictures on my phone before Mark broke it. Haven't had one since." "Well," Ryan said, handing her the camera, "let's fix that." He guided her hands to the buttons, showing her how to adjust the focus. His hands brushed hers once, warm, steady, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. "Okay," he said, stepping back. "Your turn." Sarah lifted the camera and aimed. Through the lens she caught a candid frame. Ryan kneeling beside Valor, Ellie on his knee, both bathed in soft light from the window. Ryan looked up at the exact moment she pressed the shutter, and the photo froze that fleeting expression on his face. Half smile, half surprise, something unguarded and real. She lowered the camera, blinking fast. "Got it," she said. "Let me see," he said, stepping forward. When the image appeared on the screen, he let out a low breath. "That's something." Sarah smiled. "It's our first family photo," she said quietly. Ryan hesitated, the word family hanging between them like a fragile note. Then he smiled back. "Guess it is." That evening, as twilight fell and the lake turned silver again, Sarah made dinner, simple vegetable soup and cornbread. Ryan insisted it was better than anything in town, though she didn't believe him. They ate by the fire while Ellie babbled happily in her high chair and Valor lay nearby, thumping his tail each time someone laughed. Afterward, Sarah washed the dishes while Ryan read a bedtime story to Ellie. His voice was low, steady, warm, the kind of voice that made the world feel safe. From the kitchen doorway, Sarah watched them, one hand pressed against her chest. For years, she had been waiting for the storm to end, never realizing that sometimes peace didn't come with silence. It came with small sounds, a laugh, a bark, a heartbeat beside your own. When the story ended, Ellie had already drifted off to sleep. Ryan tucked her in gently, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. He turned and found Sarah watching him. "She's going to be okay," he said. "I think we all are," Sarah replied. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You just needed someone to remind you." Valor stood, stretching, and pressed his head gently against Ryan's leg before moving toward Sarah, as if echoing his words in silence. She knelt, burying her fingers in the dog's fur. "You too, hero," she whispered. "You never stop looking out for us." The clock ticked softly. Outside, the moon rose over the lake, washing the cabin in pale light. Before heading to bed, Sarah glanced at the framed photograph Ryan had printed earlier that day, the one she had taken. It sat on the mantel now, illuminated by the fire's fading glow. Ryan, Ellie, and Valor, frozen in a moment that looked like everything she'd thought she'd lost. She smiled through the tears that came unbidden. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and golden, the kind of spring morning that carried the scent of pine and fresh earth through every open window in Aspen Ridge. The snow had melted completely now, leaving only patches of frost clinging to the northern hillsides. The small town square, usually quiet, buzzed with excitement. Banners hung between lampposts, their edges fluttering gently in the breeze. At the center of it all stood a wooden stage draped in the colors of the county, deep navy and silver, with a sign that read, "Honoring Service, Courage, and Second Chances." Ryan adjusted his uniform collar as he stood beside the stage, his dark hair neatly combed, the familiar navy jacket pressed and clean. He'd worn this uniform hundreds of times before, but never like this. Today wasn't about an arrest or a rescue. Today was about something purer, a recognition of faith, loyalty, and the quiet miracles that no law book could measure. A crowd gathered, families bundled in light jackets, children clutching paper flags. Sheriff Tom Jacobs stood near the podium, straightening his hat. The older man had a kind of rough dignity about him, a belly earned from too many years of diner coffee and long winters, but his eyes gleamed with pride. "You ready for this, Hale?" he asked gruffly. Ryan smiled faintly. "I think Valor's the one who should be nervous." As if hearing his name, the German shepherd sat proudly at Ryan's side, his coat brushed to a gleaming shine. His tag, the new one, caught the sunlight and threw tiny sparks of gold. Around his neck hung a blue ribbon, holding a silver medallion engraved with the town's seal. He looked regal, steadfast, utterly calm, as though he somehow understood what was about to happen. Nearby, Sarah stood holding Ellie, now dressed in a soft white dress and tiny pink shoes. The baby's laughter rose above the crowd's chatter, and even the sheriff couldn't help but smile. Sarah looked radiant, healthier, steadier, her dark hair falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. The simple navy dress she wore swayed in the breeze, modest but graceful. For the first time, she looked like someone who belonged in the sunlight. Ryan approached them. "You both ready?" Sarah nodded, eyes glistening. "More than ready." She glanced down at Valor, who was wagging his tail softly. "He deserves this more than anyone I know." When the clock tower struck 10, the ceremony began. Sheriff Jacobs stepped up to the podium, his voice echoing across the square. "Ladies and gentlemen, neighbors and friends, today we gather not just to honor a hero, but to remember what courage looks like when it comes wrapped in fur and loyalty." The crowd chuckled softly, but fell quiet again as he continued. "In a world that can sometimes seem cold and unforgiving, there are still hearts that burn with pure devotion. One of those hearts belongs to Valor, the German shepherd who, through Satye, storm, and through danger, saved 2 lives and reminded us all what love can do." Applause rippled through the square. Sarah held Ellie a little tighter, tears already threatening. Jacobs gestured toward Ryan. "And now, Officer Hale will say a few words." Ryan took a slow breath and stepped to the microphone. For a moment, he looked out at the crowd. Faces familiar and new, friends, colleagues, people who had only read about what happened in the paper. Then his gaze settled on Sarah, holding Ellie in the front row. Valor sat at her feet, head high, watching him. "When I first met this dog," Ryan began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "He stood in the middle of a snowstorm blocking my patrol car. I thought he was lost, but he wasn't. He was leading me to something far greater than I could have imagined." He paused, glancing toward Valor. "That night, he carried hope in his jaws. He carried life. And over these months, I've learned something. He didn't just save 1 life. He saved 3. The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. Ryan continued, his voice softer now. "Because of Valor, a baby named Ellie is alive. Because of him, her mother, Sarah, found her way home again. And because of them, I learned that the world still gives second chances, even to men like me who stopped believing they deserved them." He turned toward the sheriff, who held out the medal. Ryan knelt beside Valor, smiling as the dog wagged his tail. "You did good, partner," he whispered. "You brought us home." He slipped the silver medal over Valor's head, the ribbon settling against the dog's chest. The sunlight caught it perfectly, and for a heartbeat it looked as though the medal itself glowed. The crowd erupted into applause. Children clapped, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the back someone whistled loudly. Valor barked once, short and sharp, as though accepting his honor. Sarah wiped at her tears with a trembling hand. Ellie, startled by the sound, laughed, a bright, clear laugh that made everyone nearby smile. Ryan stood again, turning to face the crowd. "Heroism doesn't always come from badges or uniforms," he said. "Sometimes it comes from the ones who walk beside us, who never ask for anything in return except love." More applause. Even Sheriff Jacobs clapped Ryan on the shoulder when he stepped back. "Well said, son," he murmured. After the ceremony, people gathered around to pet Valor and congratulate Sarah. A few older residents even brought treats. Bacon bits wrapped in napkins, cookies, a knitted scarf someone insisted Valor should wear in winter. The dog accepted the attention with quiet dignity, his gaze never straying far from Sarah or the baby. As the crowd began to thin, Sarah approached Ryan. Her eyes were still wet, but her smile was steady. "He did it," she said softly. "He really did it." Ryan looked down at Valor, who was sitting between them, tail brushing lightly against the ground. "Yeah," he said. "He always does." They walked together toward the edge of the square where the afternoon light shimmered over the lake beyond the town. The air smelled of grass and distant rain. Ryan watched as Sarah lifted Ellie into the sunlight. The baby reached out, tiny fingers brushing the glinting metal on Valor's chest. Sarah laughed through her tears. "She loves him," she whispered. Ryan smiled. "We all do." For a long moment they stood there, the officer, the woman, the child, and the dog who had bound their lives together. Around them, Aspen Ridge moved on, shops reopening, children chasing one another across the grass. But for the four of them, time seemed to pause. Sarah turned to Ryan, voice quiet but certain. "You know," she said, "I think we all got saved that night, not just me and Ellie. Even you." Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "Yeah," he said, "maybe that's what Valor was sent to do." The breeze carried the faint echo of applause still lingering in the square. Ryan looked toward the horizon where the lake met the hills, the world bathed in gold. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't think about what he'd lost, only about what had been found. A year had passed since the night of the storm, the night when fate had brought a wounded mother, a lost baby, and a steadfast dog into the quiet life of Officer Ryan Hale. Aspen Ridge had changed with the seasons, trading its endless snow for the tender greens of spring. The lake beside Ryan's cabin was no longer frozen but alive again, shimmering beneath sunlight that danced over its gentle ripples. Birds sang in the birch trees. The world had thawed, and so had the hearts that once belonged to winter. The little house by Silverpine Lake looked different now. A small garden grew where the snowdrifts used to pile high, dotted with tulips and wildflowers that Sarah planted herself. A wooden swing hung from the porch beam, creaking softly whenever the breeze passed. And on the front door, just beneath the brass number plate, hung a small wooden sign that read in simple hand-painted letters, "The Hale Family." Inside, laughter drifted through the morning light. Ryan, now in a gray flannel shirt and rolled sleeves, stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes with mock seriousness. "Valor, no begging," he said without turning, as the German shepherd sat faithfully at his side, tail sweeping the floor like a broom. Sarah, dressed in a light blue dress and apron, leaned against the counter, shaking her head with a smile. "He's not begging," she teased. "He's supervising." Valor barked once as if agreeing. Across the kitchen a high-pitched giggle rose from the playmat where Ellie sat, now a sturdy toddler with a halo of soft golden curls. She clapped her hands when Ryan turned around with the plate of pancakes. "Da-da," she squealed. Ryan froze mid-step, eyes widening before a slow smile spread across his face. "You hear that?" he said, voice cracking with disbelief. "She said da-da." Sarah laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Looks like someone finally made it official." Ryan crouched beside his daughter, lifting her into his arms. "Say it again," he whispered. But Ellie only giggled and tugged at his collar before planting a drooling kiss on his cheek. Breakfast became a gentle chaos of syrup spills and shared laughter. Valor, ever the opportunist, managed to sneak a piece of pancake when no one was looking. Ryan pretended not to notice. Later that afternoon, the family walked down to the lakeside, where the grass had just begun to show signs of spring's touch. The air was crisp but soft, scented faintly of pine and earth. Sarah carried a blanket and a camera, while Ryan held Ellie's hand as she toddled unsteadily beside him. Valor trotted ahead, ears perked, occasionally glancing back to make sure his humans were keeping up. "Remember when this place was all snow and silence?" Sarah asked as they reached the water's edge. Ryan nodded, his eyes drifting across the lake. "Yeah. Hard to believe it's the same place." "It's not," she said quietly. "It's home now, they spread the blanket on the grass and sat together watching Ellie explore her new world. She toddled toward a patch of melting snow near the reeds, tiny hands outstretched for balance. Valor followed close behind, ever her guardian, tail wagging patiently. When she stumbled, he moved instantly, lowering his head so that she fell gently against his fur instead of the ground. Ellie squealed with delight, clinging to his neck. Valor gave a low, approving huff. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "Looks like she's already figured out who the real hero is." Sarah smiled, her eyes soft. She's not the only one. The moment hung there. Simple, beautiful, real. Ryan looked at her, and in that look were 1,000 unspoken things: gratitude, affection, and the quiet recognition of everything they had endured. Back at the cabin, the walls had become a gallery of small, framed moments, snapshots of their healing. Photos of Ellie's first Christmas, of Sarah's first day working at the town library, of Valor wearing his honorary canine medal at the town fair. But one photograph stood apart, centered above the fireplace. It was the picture Sarah had taken a year earlier, the one of Ryan holding Ellie with Valor by his side. Beneath it, in simple handwriting, Sarah had written, "The night we became a family." That evening, twilight settled gently over Silverpine Lake. The air glowed with the last rays of sunset, painting the water in strokes of amber and rose. Inside the cabin, Sarah sat in the rocking chair beside Ellie's crib. Ryan knelt at the edge of the bed, his voice soft as he read from a children's book about courage and kindness. Valor lay nearby, head resting on his paws, ears twitching whenever Ellie giggled. When the story ended, Ryan closed the book and whispered, "Good night, little one." Sarah brushed a strand of hair from Ellie's forehead and kissed her gently. "Sleep tight, my miracle," she murmured. They stepped quietly into the living room. Ryan poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one to Sarah as they settled on the couch. The fire crackled softly, its glow reflecting in their eyes. Sarah sighed contentedly. "I used to think the hardest part of life was surviving," she said. "But it's learning to live again that takes real courage." Ryan nodded slowly. "And you did it." She turned to him, smiling faintly. "No," she said, "we did it." Valor stretched beside the couch, letting out a low, satisfied grunt as if confirming the sentiment. Ryan chuckled and leaned down to scratch his ear. "What do you think, partner? Did we do okay?" The dog lifted his head, meeting Ryan's gaze with calm, knowing eyes. In them was the reflection of the firelight, warm, steady, eternal. Outside, the last snow of the season clung to the edges of the field, glowing gold under the setting sun. Ryan took Sarah's hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. They didn't need promises anymore, life they had built together was proof enough. From the bedroom came a soft rustle, followed by Ellie's sleepy voice murmuring nonsense words. Valor rose silently and padded to the doorway, curling up in his usual spot beneath the crib. Sarah leaned her head against Ryan's shoulder. "You ever think about how different everything could have been if you hadn't stopped that night?" He smiled faintly. "I think about it every day, but I stopped, and that's what matters." The fire dimmed, its glow flickering across the room. Sarah's breathing slowed, peaceful, her hand still clasped in his. Ryan looked toward the window, where the reflection of the lake shimmered beneath the stars. In that reflection, for just a moment, he saw it all. The past they'd survived, the present they'd earned, and the future that waited quietly just beyond the dawn. Valor shifted slightly, letting out a low, contented sigh. His eyes half closed, catching the flicker of firelight one last time. That same light that had once guided him through the blizzard, now resting in peace upon the home he'd helped create. And in that stillness, as the snow glowed gold beneath the rising moon, Aspen Ridge slept. Not in silence, but in harmony. Because sometimes, family isn't the one we're born into. It's the one we find when everything else falls apart. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or shining angels. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the shape of a lost dog, a crying child, or a stranger who decides to stop in the middle of a storm. God doesn't always change the world around us. Often, He changes the hearts within us, leading broken souls to find one another and heal together. In life, we all face winters, cold seasons of fear, loneliness, or loss. But as Ryan, Sarah, Ellie, and Valorasher discovered, no storm lasts forever. When love is real and faith is steady, spring always returns. The light of God can reach even the darkest road if we dare to stop, listen, and help. If this story touched your heart, Share it with someone who needs to remember that miracles still happen every day. Type Amen in the comments if you believe that God still sends angels. Sometimes with wings, sometimes with fur. And before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel so more people can feel the warmth of hope, faith, and second chances. May God bless you and everyone watching this story today.